Did you hear about the professor at Drexel?
No, what happened?
Oh man, I can't believe you haven't heard about this. It
Oh
just
wait, was
kind of
this you
speaks that
posted
you're
this on
not
Facebook?
an. I posted something about it.
The
So
blackface thing?
this, yeah. But it was related to. So that was at Oregon.
Oh, okay.
The reason why I posted those because it was in direct relevance to this other conversation that was happening about this leftist professor at Drexel, who actually went to UC Berkeley, who posted on Twitter, um, like he posts all these kind of bombastic things. This is not let's just say this is not out of character for him. He posts something that says, "All I want for Christmas is white genocide." Okay, he's a white guy. I should probably note.
I got it.
And then he deletes
Can he
that, and
really
then
get that for Christmas? That's really the philosophical problem I'm having here.
yeah, why not for why Christmas, right?
Well, no, I mean, like, would he
Um,
even exist if it
why for
happened?
his
Would he
birthday?
actually receive it? All right, please continue.
Okay, so then he deletes that and then he posts this follow-up tweet that says to clarify, and I might be paraphrasing, to clarify, when the whites were massacred in Haiti, that was a good thing.
Okay.
And then this gets picked up by like Breitbart, and everyone else who's calling for oh, this white professor is calling for the genocide, or this lefty professor is calling for white genocide, whatever.
Right.
And then Drexel has to respond, and then there's all like he's getting all these death threats and stuff, and he posted something that was said that it was satirical, that his white genocide post was satirical.
So it was meant to
Um,
highlight like the absurdity of sort of
yeah,
how extreme left rhetoric has become.
no, 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 no.
No,
Uh, no, 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 no. He was pointing out he was being satirical because the term white genocide doesn't exist and is only a term used by racists to denounce interracial marriage, um, and multiculturalism. Although I can't exactly for the life of me see how the post about the Haitian stuff can be satirical.
yeah,
But the point is that he was trying to defend his right of speech because they were like calling for him to be fired,
right.
right? And then there was this. Then meanwhile, there's this case at University of Oregon, with that law professor in blackface, which was just bizarre.
Right. So what happened? It was like a Halloween party, and then
There was all sorts of like red flags in this story. It was like, why is this law professor having a Halloween party? Why is she inviting her students to the
why
Halloween party? Why is
are they
why
going?
is she, and then it culminates, of course, with like, why the fuck is she in blackface? And so she was dressed up as her favorite book, which is like Black Man in a White Coat, I think is the book.
Is she American?
And it was, I was wondering that myself because I'm like, maybe like it smells to me like pure like insensitivity and ignorance,
Right.
and stupidity. Like maybe she wasn't familiar with the
The
like
history.
cultural resonance and history, and the racial history of blackface. But I don't think we can offer her that excuse for everything. That I don't really know her very well, but
Okay.
she certainly should have known better. And I mean, it was stupid and it was racist and it was incredibly inappropriate. Um, and but then the question becomes like, then how does the university respond to that,
Right.
right? Um, and maybe the context in that, like, she, not to minimize the stupidity, but she was like, she said that she was like for this book in order to call attention to racism or whatever. It just seems so stupid and not malicious, but
Call attention to racism. I needed to be made aware of that
yeah,
racism.
exactly. Right. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, But then how the university responded, at least from my perspective, was to set this precedent that 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 like basically expands the definition of harassment.
Okay.
And so that any, student, I mean, this is the fear that any student who feels um, uncomfortable can claim harassment from the professor. And then what kind of implications does this have for
Right.
speech? And so I thought it was interesting to put the two cases together because they're clearly from different, kind of political orientations.
Yeah.
Um,
Sort of.
but I don't
So
know.
what are people saying? So like, are people kind of like sort of following along the standard lines of like, uh, so if you're on the left, you think that the professor who is in blackface should be punished. Do you think, and what do you think about the guy who talked about white genocide?
Yeah.
Is there like a standard view where it's like, and I
I
think the
think,
guy who talked about white genocide is okay?
well, I think like, at least from my perspective, at least what I've been seeing is that everyone pretty much denounces the Drexel guy. At least everyone is supporting the Drexel guy and denouncing the attacks on him.
Really,
Right.
it's okay that he did the said white genocide. That's great.
I've seen a lot of defenses that because he was being satirical, there's no such thing as white genocide. Um,
You mean like, yeah? What does that mean? There's no such thing. I don't understand.
well, you should maybe read his like response. I thought the response was good. That that white genocide is a trope used by white supremacists, and that's true. I mean,
There's sort of two things, I guess, that these stories, like back when you posted them on Facebook, also kind of like made me think about. The first we've already talked about in the past, which is just the basic idea that like I don't think that you can really have these discussions or have any kind of principled rules that people could be comfortable with without having a straightforward discussion about the objective badness of harms.
mhm.
Like, and I think maybe this is just another kind of hard problem situation where if harassment, of course, like if you say something that really prevents people from participating in the life of a university, for really getting the education that they need, obviously you've done something bad and you've really both hindered everyone's ability to learn from that person and you've hindered that person's ability to learn themselves. But you're going to want to put some restrictions on what that person could actually claim as a harm to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
And this is what was I think is so very dangerous about this rhetorical slide that I'm seeing, where, or maybe it's like an epistemological principle, that the notion of harm resides completely in the subjective experiences of the victim.
right,
And I think there are good historical reasons for like moving the pendulum that way because, like for instance, in the history of sexual harassment, our society has, and racial harassment too, we've minimized the experiences of women and people of color,
right.
and the objective harm that they go through. But then, of course, there are some unintended consequences to going too far in that direction and completely negating any possibility for objective harm,
Right.
right?
And
That
it's
does not reside in the purely in the experiences of the person being harmed.
and it's kind of interesting because the whole argument um, that you should sort of like punish a professor for doing something that could be perceived as harassment based on the subjective experience of the perceiver or the
Mm-hmm.
victim um, depends on the idea that the powers that be, if it's the administration sort of doing the punishing, whatever, that they care enough. about the well-being of the victim, that whatever their subjective experience is, that's really important to us. We
Mm-hmm.
need to protect that person purely on the basis of their subjective experience. And that's a context where you already have some people in power, at least that assumes that there are already people in power who do in fact care about you,
Mm-hmm.
that are, very sensitive to your problems. Um, and all the stuff about sort of like, shifting the pendulum and notwithstanding. Um, but I think the other thing that's also kind of interesting to me about these situations is that um, one of the things that was really interesting when I was at Berkeley, sort of doing the student government thing, was in talking to the administration about the way it responded to student protests, and that sort of like students could occupy a building, uh, you know, technically doing something unlawful or sort of against the, their agreement with the university, and then not really get punished for it, at least not by the university, right? They would be there and then they would just leave.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody would go home. And when we're talking about like, freedom of speech and the ability to sort of like protest, or kind of like maybe in some sense, in some cases have artistic expression, like you might say, okay, I put on blackface and I put on blackface because I wanted to highlight something about racism and some sort of like quasi artistic expression that's getting you there.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're not just saying it straightforwardly. They're like, doing something performative. And that other thing is conveying some sort of fact. One of the things about sort of like protest or artistic expression or all these types of things is that you might think that the power of it um, is partially in the response of power,
Mm-hmm.
in the response of the people who, you're protesting against.
Yeah, it's a provocation.
Yeah. So like, um, the idea of like, freedom of speech, like free academic speech, like a professor should be able to say whatever they want, regardless of whether it harasses students, et cetera, because that's how you foster freedom of, inquiry, um, you know, things like that. Uh, Part of pursuing those types of ideas, at least there's something to think about, might be also to suffer the consequences.
Mm-hmm.
That is, you know, I want to do something really provocative
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I want to
I
get
see
an
what you're
idea out
saying.
there. And it's not just that I'm going to say it, but I'm going to say it and I'm going to suffer the consequences. And that whole
Mm-hmm.
complex is what really articulates that idea. Because if I can just stand there and say something and there's no
Yeah,
repercussions, then in what sense was what I was saying really truly provocative or avant-garde or like against the
yeah.
powers that be, because people were just going to allow me to say it anyway.
Well, I think we could talk about different forms of repercussions. That's why I'm like, yeah, I think people should be able to say incorrect things on campus, whether they be scientifically inaccurate, climate change is not real, for instance, or that they are like socially or morally or politically incorrect. Like, I don't know, people of a certain race have lower IQs or something. Okay.
Right.
Um, Scientifically inaccurate, or even morally wrong. They should be able to say those things on campus, but that doesn't mean that all of those ideas have to be respected or treated as equally as any other scientific claim, right? So, but that also doesn't, so they can suffer the repercussions of it in the sense that their credibility is annihilated, their they're denounced as wrong. Uh, but that doesn't mean that they like legally, I think we can separate that from like that they legally shouldn't be able to say it. So somebody can still suffer the consequences. They can suffer social consequences or professional consequences without the university ever actually having to like ban that speech.
Well, I guess there might be a reasonable distinction to be made between sort of like what's sort of legal, what's university regulation, and then what's
Yeah.
just, people responding negatively to a speech. I guess the question kind of maybe people are interested in is there room for like a university regulation sort of
Mhm.
inside of what's legal? So you might say legally, yes, this person is allowed to say whatever hateful thing they want to say.
Yeah.
But now that you're in the university, we're going to have this additional set of regulations on you. And certainly legally, you can transgress those regulations, but you're going to suffer consequences within the university. And then if you think that that's truly unjust, if you think that there's some
Hmm.
real powerful idea to be articulated by way of transgressing those regulations, then you do that and then you suffer consequences within the university. But your sort of freedom of speech vis-a-vis the US government is perfectly protected.
Yeah, but I mean, how would that manifest? Like for instance, the white genocide prof or whatever.
Right.
Like, I mean, it's in that case it's interesting because I do think that a lot of what he says like on Twitter follows this logic of provocation. Um, I don't think that speech, that claim about white genocide or whites in Haiti would have as much rhetorical force or point if it didn't have the potential to piss off a lot of people from a
Right.
particular side, right?
Yeah.
So I mean the whole like what gives those the words force in the first place was that they were provocative. But like it was extramural speech, regardless of even what you think about the content of it. Like I mean, you could certainly imagine, people on like the on the on the right saying that they feel uncomfortable with the speech, that they don't feel safe or whatever in his classroom. But what kind of imposition are you going to put on him, or what kind of regulation? I can't see any regulation that would not that on that guy that would like maintain my commitment to free academic inquiry.
But presumably, if he had said something like, Rwandan genocide, uh, that's what I want for Christmas, something like that, then you'd say, oh
Yeah.
yeah, remove this guy's teaching position, right? And you'd say, not to in any way say that these things are technically, equivalent, sort of like with a historical lens,
Yeah.
but the idea of there being a university restriction on what professors say outside of the classroom is not beyond the pale. It's not out of the question.
Yeah,
Or
I
maybe you
guess,
would
and
say
that's
that. I don't want to put
I
words in your
don't
mouth.
know. I mean, that's what I think we have to acknowledge, like the hard problemness of
Right.
this,
Like there's an
right?
objective fact of the matter about how bad this thing was. And I think that just solves all of our problems. If people would
Yeah,
just
but who's to
accept the fact
decide?
that certain things are
But
really
this,
bad and certain things aren't that bad.
yeah, but we can't all agree about how bad
And that's
something
okay.
is.
And I think that's okay. The way you settle that is just by agreement. Or you say by
Uh-huh.
majority or whatever. You get
By
together and you say,
majority.
look, all of us have different preferences about the level at which we're willing to accept what types of speech we're willing to accept and what types of speech we find truly harmful to us. And we're going to get together and we're going to have a university and we're going to agree to some rules of the road for how we interact with each other. And
Hmm.
those are the rules you follow. It's not that, all universities have to have one set of rules or that everyone has to have the same preferences about what level of harms
I'm
they want
scared
to.
about that a little bit though, that it would like um I don't know. I think that I tend to be a free speech extremist. You know,
Yeah.
this is and this is my that's my bias. You know, I think that if I will lean towards allowing things.
Yeah.
Even if I find them like morally reprehensible, abominable, like on that scale of like objective harm versus, you know, free speech, I tend to lean towards speech. Um, because I'm scared about this tyranny of the majority, basically. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
that if you allow like the majority of university professors, and first of all, it's not, I mean, we can talk about faculty governance and these types of things, but very often it's not faculty governance. It's like the administration trying to like, you know, save their image or whatever,
Right.
you know, and that I think can get like, you know, I don't want the administration based on their own concerns to be able to put in place regulations about what is like objectively harmful.
Right.
Um,
And then you talk about students.
but
That's
I,
like, students could have an entirely different view, and then whether our students just sort of like agreeing to a set of rules when they come into a university or they apply there, or is it that they should also get to help construct those rules once they get there?
yeah,
But this tyranny of the
yeah.
majority point, well taken. I think that is like something something scary that's like very difficult to find a way to get around if you're able to just sort of like construct rules about how things should go.
I mean, the thing is like, okay, so if someone, let's take like an extreme case. If somebody was like, all I want for Christmas is the Rwandan genocide.
Right.
The thing is like, I don't know how to say this without coming across as an asshole. So I'm just gonna say it. It's like I'm thinking about how much of like if okay, so I'll make it more personal. If somebody was like, all I want for Christmas is another Holocaust,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, Um, like as a Jewish person, like to be quite honest, I'm not like extremely threatened by that person because it's in the context of like he's going to be completely annihilated by his colleagues. You know, like no one is gonna. I mean, it becomes scarier once he actually is like has credence or
Right.
weight on the
Right.
university campus. But
Well,
that
I mean,
person's
he's gonna have
so
advisees. He's gonna
marginalized.
have students.
Yeah,
That's tough. Like if your academic advisor doesn't think of you as a human being, and also, I mean, fine. You know, it's not like you have complete freedom to choose what your who your advisor is. You're like, oh, this is what I'm interested in. Oh, well, it turns out there's only one specialist in that on campus. Now you're with guy who wants second Holocaust, and that job could have gone to someone else. So who thinks of Jews as
yeah.
people, or who thinks that
So
everybody.
you would fire that guy. You would like relieve him of his tenure.
I just have questions. I don't have solutions. You know, it actually, yeah, I think if really push comes to shove, I'd fire that guy. I think I'd fire that
Yeah.
guy, and I think
Would you fire
that
the white genocide guy?
I think that I lean towards firing the white genocide guy, but I do recognize that I think there's just something different on the level of objective harms that happen with both of those
Yeah.
statements because of the
Right.
historical context and because not just of what genocides have happened, et cetera, but also someone coming a student of color coming into that school versus a white student coming into that school and all the baggage that comes with either side. So I think there's
Yeah.
just
Okay, would you
I make that
fire
argument.
the black face lady? We've all just given this all of these hard problems to you and now you get to decide.
I might just fire everyone. I just fire. I think. Well, okay. So
So what
the
exactly
black
can people say or
lady,
do, Max,
black
that does not get
lady.
them fired?
Look, I think it would be. Here's the way I think it should go. Right. Um, the campus should be able to have a set of rules that are sort of distinct from legal freedom of speech rules that the people on campus can come to an agreement about. and that, you know, students should have a say in, students should be able to protest if they feel like there's a tyranny of the majority. Then students should really get in the administration's face. They should make it hard for everyone until uh,
Mhm.
you know, those rules take their concerns into account, and that everybody can sort of, even if it's uneasy and maybe necessarily so, can find some set of rules that they sort of work around. And then once you have those kinds of rules in place, I think you punish people on the basis of those rules. So if someone really thinks it's super important to tweet something about white genocide or something, or to wear blackface, they
Mhm.
better think it's really important, because they've become a part of a community that has made it explicit that they're not okay with that.
Yeah.
And either they're going to do it in such a way that it becomes illuminating for everyone and they're going to change the rule for this person, or they're just going to do it and then they're going to get suspended or kicked out. And I think that's okay, because I think that, you know, these communities should be able to determine a set of rules that they want to, you know, abide by.
Okay, what if it's extramural though? Like I do think that it's kind of weird, like what if it doesn't affect your job?
Well, I think
You have a particular set of beliefs. You don't allow it to affect your job in the sense of your teaching and your advising, and you respect all of your students and
right.
whatever. And your outward behavior on the job is fine. And
Yeah.
then privately you go home and you say that you want white genocide or whatever. I don't know. But I just think it's like, what other job would that be okay for that person to
Well, I think it's really interesting because I think that, you know,
like? What does freedom of
um,
speech mean then anymore if you're like fired from your job because of your?
yeah. Well, I think surprisingly, like a lot of other jobs are much more restrictive in what
I
you
mean,
can say, at
yeah,
least
that's
publicly.
actually true. Yeah,
And so
that's
there's like,
true.
there's public speech versus private speech. Like if, you know, this professor goes home and then they just want to talk to their family and just be like, just, you know, I hate minorities, you know, that's, that's one thing. And it's very difficult, like, to say that, you know, if someone like bugged their house and then that information somehow came to light,
Yeah,
then I would say, you know, maybe that person shouldn't get fired. You invade their privacy. But if someone's doing something publicly, they're doing it on Twitter, they're doing it on TV. Um, I think it's really difficult to separate that from what, in like a practical way, from what they do in the classroom. Like if every
yeah,
time I go see my advisor, and as far as I can tell, she's being perfectly cordial with me, and then she says, you know, just really hateful things, uh, you know, on the internet, in a public manner, then it's like, I don't know if I can really separate that from her job performance, from her ability to be an advisor. I mean, it's
yeah.
super hard.